Hello. It's been a really long conference and you're all still here. I hope you're still awake. This is a really warm room. If you fall asleep, I will forgive you. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm Mac. I'm an engineering team lead at Osirium. We're sponsoring. I would tell you to go and look at the stand, but that's coming down pretty much as we speak. So my colleagues will be at the back at the end with some cards and pamphlets and things if you're interested in working for us at all. So I've read a lot about how you can organise teams in large companies, but there's really very little around on what you do when you're a really small company and you start to grow. And that's what we've been doing at Osirium for the past couple of years, so I wanted to share my experiences and talk about it a little bit. There's two sides to this. There's like the human side of what you do with all your people, and there's the code side of sort of how your code works as the number of people working on it change. I think they're two talks in themselves, and I'm going to keep this to the human side. So here's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start with our background a little bit, tell you how we got to where we are. I'm going to talk about what options we had for what we did when our team got a little bit too big to handle. I'm going to tell you what we did in all the gory details, and I'm going to talk about how it's working out and what I'd do differently if I did it all again. So it's 2015. We had one team and it was good. We were selling software, we were hiring people. It was working all right, you know. We had 6 developers, 1 support person. We had a CTO who was also our pre-sales engineer. We had an engineering director who was also our marketing manager. So every 2 weeks we could fit almost everyone in the company around the table. We didn't just have one software team, we had one team that covered the whole company. And that was great. You know, we had business stakeholders who could be directly involved in our feature discussions, and they knew exactly what was going on. When we left that meeting, the entire company knew what was going to happen next. So before I get on, a little bit about our process. I think that might be relevant to understanding how we work. So we pretty much followed Scrum. It was quite light. We didn't have to enforce a lot of the rules very well. We didn't even have a Scrum Master as such, because everything generally worked. We ran 2-week sprints. We had a sprint review on Tuesdays where we went through our review, our retrospective and planning. We were done by lunchtime. It worked pretty well. No one issue really came up 2 retrospectives in a row, so I like to think that it worked well for us and we solved the issues as we went along. And then on the 16th of April 2016, we opened the London Stock Exchange. This is us on the balcony ringing the bell. We took a big load of investment as we floated on AIM. There's no actual bell, it turns out. You don't get to ring a bell. But you do get these very pretty screens showing off your name. It was an amazing day. It was so cool to be part of it. We were such a tiny little company. The whole company came along. We invited some business partners along as well. It was fantastic, really, really good. And we started hiring. You know, an influx of cash means an influx of staff. So we doubled the size of our engineering and support teams in 2016, and we added sales and marketing departments, and suddenly that little meeting with the whole company in wasn't the whole company anymore. But it's not just about that meeting. You might have seen this picture before. There's a link in the slides to where it comes from. But as you add more people, you add more lines of communication. And that gets complicated one way or another, and at some point it's going to break. This manifested for us in a few different ways. It's not just about one meeting getting busier and busier, although that is what I've talked about quite a lot. It's about your bug tracker getting too hard to comprehend and parse on a daily basis, about your campfire rooms, because we aren't at Slack time yet, this is still campfire, just getting too busy to manage. You can't keep up anymore. And one day, as the team leader, I just realised that I didn't know what everyone was doing on the product anymore. I was demoing a new feature for a customer, and I realised that I didn't know what the feature did. I hadn't written a single line of code for it, and you know, as a leader, I really needed to narrow my focus, and everyone felt the same way. So for us, it became really important that we reduced these lines of communication that we're dealing with on a daily basis. So what could we do? We could make our meetings longer, but a morning of meetings is long enough. No one needs more than that. Everyone's pretty fried after a morning of meetings. You can get a decent amount of work done in a morning. It's probably time to stop. You could add more meetings on a different day, but then you've got to schedule it all for everybody, and you lose focus. And that focus of everyone getting together on a Tuesday was really important for us. It really held us together. And you can make these meetings more efficient, and you could time box everything. But that sucks the life out of them. And your meetings should have life. We have this horrible stigma of meetings being these necessary evils, but they shouldn't be. You've hired all these amazing, clever people, and you're getting them all in a room to solve problems. That should be great. And if it's not, then there's something wrong there. Maybe it's your process. Maybe it's how many people are around the table. And another thing about time boxing is chat, right? If you've got a bit of slack in your time tables, you can have a bit of a chat, and we found that was really, really important to us. It's really good for team building, just talking to each other, and most of our good ideas came from it. When we were planning something, we'd talk about it together, and we'd have good ideas. And when someone showed off a new feature in a review, we could just talk about it. And that was really nice. It was just great to be able to be in that meeting and just say, oh, hang on a sec, let's talk through that. And our retrospectives could go on for pretty much as long as they needed to. And that meant that we solved issues straight away, right there. It turned out that most of our product management was really done this way. It was really informal, and all our strategic movements were pretty informal. And when we cut all of that out and we had to time box things, we sort of lost our whole process. It was just all chat. So, a couple of other options before I get on to actually turning into two teams. You could remove your support team from that meeting. Can you cut people out? Can you cut everyone out but engineers? It's really trim down who needs to be in that meeting. Might be an option for you. Can you put some engineers together into smaller teams? So perhaps you can group 2 to 3 together, and they present in a review as one, and they present in planning as one. Perhaps that could work for you. So you have some little sub-teams, but didn't really work for us. So ultimately, we decided to split into 2 teams. So how can you split your team? You've got to figure out what works for you as a company. Perhaps you've got some product you can split on. Perhaps you do 2 products. That'd be great. That'd work really well. Perhaps if you don't have 2 obvious separate products, perhaps they're internal products that work. Perhaps you've got some really clear software boundaries that you can divide down the middle on. Perhaps customer type works for you. So for us, we have managed service providers and enterprise customers. And pretty much every single customer we have fits into one of the 2 bins. So maybe that works. Roles could work. Perhaps you can start a QA department or a DevOps team. Perhaps that's something that you could go for. And goals or missions. So you might be able to work with a security team, or have a team that focuses on compliance or growth. These are nice, all-encompassing roles that could suit you. And how many teams do you want? Maybe 2 isn't right. Maybe you want to go from 1 to 3, or 1 to 4, depending on what fits. Maybe you've got 4 products. Maybe you've got 3 products. So something to consider. And who goes into your teams? If you've got the luxury of choice in a big company, maybe you've got lots of people, but in a small company, maybe you don't. You don't have 2 of everyone you need. Agile communities, I think, generally agree that cross-functional teams are pretty good. If a team has everyone it needs to get its work done within the team, it's going to have an easier time getting work done. But when you're a small company, your teams aren't going to be identical. For us, we only had 1 front-end engineer. So you've got to think about how you're going to divide up the work in future as you divide up your people. What about everyone else? Everyone else in the company is going to be affected by this. And everyone else who was in that meeting is going to be affected. So can your CTO be in every sprint meeting? Do they want to be? How will they react to not being there? How will you communicate to your support team now? How will you escalate issues into engineering, and how will you report back? And how will you make product decisions? Do you need buy-in from both teams to get something done? How will the teams communicate with each other as well? That's a factor aside from how everyone else is going to communicate with your teams. Your 2 or 3 teams need to know what the other ones are doing. Finally, important point for any decision-making process, just think back to your goals. Where did you start with this, and does your plan solve the problem? So for us, it was about reducing those lines of communication, but for you, maybe it's about bureaucracy and reducing that. Maybe it's about flexibility. Maybe it's about building a crack team to work on a particular task. So here's what we did. First thing, I talked to everybody in one-to-one meetings to see if anybody had any good ideas, see if anyone had anything they wanted to happen. I wanted to get everybody's feedback on it. We had nothing that stood out for us, no immediately good ideas. We didn't have good product or software boundaries. We're kind of a big monolith. And we weren't confident that we could divide across our customer boundary. We didn't think that the work would be particularly even across the two. So we chose 2 teams. Felt the simplest possible move for us is to split down the middle. We picked 2 leaders, and we decided to keep our teams broadly cross-functional and have no real focus for either of them. So we had this really start-up-y, do whatever needs doing to keep the business going kind of vibe, and we thought, let's keep that going in the teams. Let's just have 2 teams that do what the most important thing is to do right now. We assigned people to teams pretty much at random. We wanted to make sure we had a good balance of senior and junior across the 2 teams, but beyond that, we more or less mixed it up. We ran our sprint meetings at the same time, and once every 3 sprints we ran a full department retrospective to catch up with everybody on how it was all going. We added a technical stakeholder meeting on top of that to report on the sprint work and provide direction from the rest of the company. We were already emailing our sprint reports out to all at Osirium, so we didn't really need to change how that functioned, because we'd had that running from when almost everyone in the company was in the room. It just made sense to keep that going for now. Our CTO, our marketing manager, support team no longer regularly attended the sprints. We had a final sprint as one team when we announced it. We planned that sprint together, and then we operated the sprint separately. I had this bright idea that to help the teams build their identities, they should name each other completely independently of each other. So, introducing our 2 teams, Mango and Wild Stallions. It's not my best move, I'll be honest. And what we worried about, we worried how people would mesh together. We had this really close-knit team. We went for lunch every day. It was really getting quite impractical to try and go for lunch as 12 people every day. Probably one of the biggest reasons for moving into 2. But we really liked that. We really liked that we all talked all the time. We didn't want to lose it. And we didn't know if we would have sort of A team, B teams. Would we have competition between the 2? What if one team outperformed the other in some really obvious way? And when we'd be able to get things done? We're splitting a team that was working well together into 2, and are we pulling apart the people that would get things done together, just making everything take too long? So how's it going so far? It's going well. We're growing, we're sponsoring here, we're hiring, we are getting bigger and bigger customers, but that's not the interesting stuff, is it? That's not what you really learn about here, so I'm going to talk about some of the bits that haven't gone so well. So, moving product decisions away from the teams really slowed us down. It's a core part of Scrum. You should have a product owner in your Scrum, and we didn't have that, which just meant we were really slow to ramp up. We didn't immediately gain anything from moving. It took a while for our stakeholder meeting to figure out what it was. We thought it would be a direction-setting meeting that would make decisions, And it turned out it was much more of a knowledge sharing and alignment meeting. There weren't many directions to set there. It was more about just catching up. And so we added a team lead meeting that was actually assigning tickets and talking about, well, what are you actually going to do this sprint? And we did find that no one team was the best for the job. So shortly after we split, we had a really important deadline that we couldn't afford to miss, and we actually had to build a special project team out of a couple of different members of the teams to get things done. So that did bite us. To some extent, we've accepted it, and we've accepted that things will be a little bit slower, but you can't always avoid that in a startup. So what are we worried about now? Now we're moving on. Planning work in the stakeholder meeting can be really top-down. Sometimes it's great and the teams can self-organise. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. So to get around that a little bit, we give teams broad epics or themes. And that means the team can operate within that epic quite well, but the business can shift teams' focus as they need to. And teams that do that shift their focus, can struggle to feel ownership a little bit. So that's tough, and we're working on that. We worry about the people outside the teams feeling alienated. Our teams are still quite insular, and our engineering department in general is still really friendly, which is really nice. We still go for lunch. We often work with the other team, and we very regularly review each other's code. It's the best way to get someone who's never seen the code before to check it out. So that's really good. But we do worry about how that affects everyone else now. A lot of our information is held within the teams. It's a lot different to when there were 9 of us in one office. And of course we worry about our process. Do we have too much, too little? I think every single company probably worries about that on some level. I think you're always kind of somewhere on the boundary of too much process or too little. So what do I wish I'd known earlier? What would I do differently? I'd over-communicate everything. Even if you think it's really boring and you're being overly verbose, I tell everyone everything over and over and over again. The example of this that really came up is when we assign people to teams, I didn't even think about it as a decision. It was a random thing, so I didn't mention it. But my team thought it was reflective of their performance. And that hadn't occurred to me at all. So I should have just told them every single decision that we made. Don't mistake a lack of ideas for a lack of interest. When everyone didn't have any good ideas for me about how to split the teams, I assumed they wouldn't mind what I was doing with it. But it turned out they really, really cared. It's really important to the way they work every day. But they just didn't know what to do, the same as me. And this impacts everyone. It's not just your teams, it's the whole business. Your sprint reports will turn from being a set of notes designed for people who were in the meeting to being a whole report for people who had never been in your meetings at all and probably didn't even know how your product worked under the hood. Suddenly they have to be read by sales and marketing. And 2 teams on one product really slowed us down, I think, and I think that team missions or goals or boundaries, really separating their responsibilities is a big deal. If I was going to do this again, I'd make that happen. And I think it would take a lot of engineering effort in our case to make it happen. I need to plan in advance, but I think it would be worth every second of it. So that's me. I would love to talk about this stuff. I love talking about teams. So if you want to get in touch with me, that's my email address, and that's me on Twitter and GitHub. My slides are pinned on top of my Twitter feed. Osirium, as I've said, is hiring. We're a bit different to your average Python company because we write a virtual appliance that drops into data centers with no internet access. We run a lot of twisted and celery, so we're not a Django app. We do things a little bit differently. There's some brochures at the back. Check out the website. If you're interested in hiring, email Ed Sharp or me, and look us up on Twitter. I think we've got a few minutes for questions. Are there any?
Yeah, we've certainly got a few minutes for questions. Okay, there's one there. If you could keep your questions to proper questions as well, that'd be great. Thanks.
Hi, I work at a company that is just on the cusp of a very similar thing, particularly on our engineering team. And one thing that we are worried about is will developers, we're splitting along the boundaries of goals in our product. And we're worried about developers possibly getting bored working on the same thing for too long. Are you moving people around teams? I guess in your case, this might be good for knowledge sharing or just working with different people. How are you doing that? And are you sort of using any sort of techniques to sort of see when might be a good time to move people around?
Good question. So we found it's worked completely organically. Our team leads maintain one-to-ones with our team members, and we ask about that stuff. And so far it's happened a few times, and it's happened almost completely because it's just made more sense at the time. Like two people are working on similar things, and they just go, you know what, we should be in the same team. So they are for a little bit, and it's really worked. I think the best thing to do with that is just talk to your developers, and like, there's probably no reason why you can't move someone. So just try and be pragmatic about it and see what you can do in terms of flexibility.
Obviously, you don't want to over-engineer for something that might not happen, but are you going to be hiring more people? And if so, how do you see this evolving?
We are hiring more people, and we don't quite know. We have been thinking for a while that maybe we should split our 2 teams into 3 teams and have much smaller teams and then grow them out. So that might be the way we do it. It's sort of, we're at about 10 engineers, so maybe you go down to 3 teams of 3 and a team of 4, and then you build them up to teams of 5 and then 6, and then like split out again. We don't have a current plan for it. It's going to change depending on who we get. If we get people that have specific specific skills, then maybe that'll turn into a team that makes sense.
Okay, I think there's one just in here, one at the front, and a couple more further back, so I'll see if we can squeeze them all in.
Hi, so I'm mostly curious, did I catch it correctly that you do cross-team pull request reviews?
Yes, we do.
All right, don't you worry, or like, how long does it make sense? Because I mean, the bigger you grow, the more likely it is that the engineers will not have the context of like knowing the code base anymore. You cannot know everything, right? So does it make sense? Is it a knowledge sharing thing at this point, or is it like, what is the purpose and how long do you think you'll keep it up?
It's not something we do strictly. So if it doesn't make sense for a certain pull request, we won't do it. But it works really, really well because it means you keep an eye on what the other team are doing, which right now for us is a really big deal. It's great for knowledge sharing. If we split into 2 products, then it really won't make sense anymore, and we'll stop doing it. I mean, a lot of my questions are being quite pragmatic, and that's kind of the way that we work it. But yeah, I think right now it's brilliant for us. It's really, really good because you get a completely fresh pair of eyes on your code, and that's really useful.
Okay, so hi. This may or may not be applicable to you, but if you get hiring loads of new people, how do you kind of keep the culture of the company the same, given that you've started from quite small, humble beginnings?
That is a tough question. I'm frightened about it. Is the answer? I think it comes down to management. I'm a big fan of kind of middle management in general. I know it's a bit of a mixed topic, but I think your engineering managers, your VP engineering, your line managers make that happen. And I'm not sure how we're going to maintain it other than that I know the personalities in our company will manage it. We will keep going for lunch every day together and that kind of thing. And I think it's just about keeping up some of those rituals that, like, you'd never write them down, would you? You'd never say we walk to Sainsbury's every day, and that's how we keep company culture going. But it seems to be how it fits.
Why not write them down?
Well, why not? No, that's a very good point. We should write them down.
Okay, I think we're actually running short on time, so I did see a few people who had questions, so perhaps if if they can briefly catch you, Mac, afterwards, that would be fantastic. If not, maybe you can get in touch with Mac that way. But once again, thanks again for a fantastic talk. Really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.